The spring of 1865 should have been a season of hope for the United States. After 4 long, bloody years, the Civil War had finally ended. The Union stood victorious, slavery had been abolished, and President Abraham Lincoln, tall, solemn, and weary, was seen by many as the man who had saved the nation. Yet beneath the cheers and celebrations, a storm of hatred was gathering. Abraham Lincoln was not born into privilege. He had grown up in a small log cabin in Kentucky, working hard from boyhood, teaching himself to read by firelight, and carrying with him a quiet but unshakable determination. By the time he entered the White House, he was already known as Honest Abe, a man of integrity, humor, and deep empathy. But power had changed him too. The burdens of war carved new lines into his face, and the constant weight of decision-making gave him the air of a man twice his age. Washington in April 1865 was a city caught between 2 worlds. The streets bustled with soldiers returning home, widows in black mourning dresses, and freed slaves who now walked proudly as citizens of a new America. Bands played patriotic songs, and children ran through the Capitol grounds waving small flags. But in the shadows, bitterness festered. Many Southerners saw Lincoln not as a savior, but as a tyrant. To them, he was the destroyer of their way of life, a man whose very presence was an insult. On the evening of April 14th, Lincoln prepared for what seemed like a rare moment of peace. His wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, suggested they attend a performance at Ford's Theater, just a few blocks away from the White House. The play was a comedy called Our American Cousin, and for a brief night, Lincoln allowed himself to imagine laughter instead of war. As he put on his simple black suit and top hat, he turned to Mary with a tired smile. "Lincoln, softly, we must both be cheerful tonight. The war is over, and perhaps the future can be brighter." But behind those words lingered something unspoken. Lincoln had confided to close friends in the days leading up to that night that he often dreamt of death. He described visions of walking through the White House, hearing the sound of mourners, and finding a corpse wrapped in funeral cloth. When he asked who had died, a guard replied, "The President." Was it merely the exhaustion of war weighing on him? Or was it a chilling foreshadow of what was to come? Ford's Theater was alive with energy that night. Gas lamps glowed warmly, carriages lined the streets, and laughter echoed from inside the building. As Lincoln entered the presidential box with Mary and their guests, the audience rose to their feet. For a moment, the theater became a stage not only for the play, but for history itself. The President of the United States, the man who had ended the Civil War, sat in plain view of hundreds of people, vulnerable, yet unaware of the danger lurking just beyond the curtain of joy. Unbeknownst to Lincoln, a man was moving in the shadows. John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor with fiery eyes and an even fiercer hatred for Lincoln, believed that killing the president would save the South. To him, Lincoln was not a hero, but a tyrant who had destroyed liberty. And as he polished his small pistol and rehearsed his role, Booth was about to step into the darkest performance of his life. The night began with laughter, but it would end with screams. And so, as the play carried on and the audience erupted with joy at every comedic line, Lincoln leaned back in his chair, his tall frame relaxed for the first time in weeks. He could not know that history was counting down its final moments for him, that this night of peace would become a nation's greatest tragedy. Even as Lincoln enjoyed the brief comfort of laughter inside Ford's Theater, his enemies moved in silence. None burned hotter with hatred than John Wilkes Booth. Booth was no ordinary man. He was a well-known actor, admired for his dramatic roles and striking presence. But behind the charm lay a storm of bitterness. He was a Southern sympathizer, a man who saw Lincoln as a tyrant who had trampled on the Constitution and destroyed the South's honor. Booth's hatred had consumed him. For weeks he had plotted with fellow conspirators, whispering in smoky taverns about ways to strike at the heart of the Union. At first, their plan had been to kidnap Lincoln, hoping to use him as leverage to free Confederate prisoners. But after General Robert E. Lee's surrender, the South was finished. Kidnapping was no longer enough. Booth's ambitions darkened. He would kill Lincoln. And not just Lincoln, he wanted to topple the entire Union leadership in a single night. In his fevered mind, this act was not murder, it was salvation. Booth, to his accomplices, voice low, "If we strike down the tyrant, we strike down his cause. One bullet will avenge the South." But while Booth's heart seethed with vengeance, Lincoln's was heavy with compassion. Even after years of brutal war, he spoke of forgiveness. He wanted to heal the wounds of a broken nation, to welcome the South back into the Union with dignity. Many around him thought he was too lenient. But Lincoln knew the deeper truth. Without mercy, peace would never last. The contrast could not have been sharper. One man, filled with rage, believed that violence was the only answer. The other, weary yet steadfast, believed that reconciliation could bind a shattered people together. In the days before the assassination, Lincoln often confided to friends about his hopes and his worries. At a cabinet meeting, just hours before that fateful night, he shared a dream of a ship sailing quickly toward an unknown shore. To him it symbolized progress, a brighter destiny for America. His ministers were moved, but also unsettled by the strange intensity in his voice. Lincoln, quietly to his cabinet, "Gentlemen, we stand on the edge of a new dawn. But I fear the shadows grow longer." The shadows were indeed growing. Booth had rehearsed every step of his plot. He studied the layout of Ford's Theater, the timing of the guards, even the exact moment when the audience would laugh loudest during the play. To him, it was just another performance, except this one would be written in blood. Meanwhile, Lincoln remained unaware of the danger. Crowds adored him, but not all voices in America were kind. In newspapers, critics mocked his tall, awkward frame, his rural accent, even his compassion. To some, he was not a hero, but a clown. Others whispered that his policies would destroy the nation's future. And still, amid praise and ridicule, Lincoln pressed on, convinced that doing what was right mattered more than popularity. The conflict was not only between Booth and Lincoln, it was within the very soul of the nation. Half rejoiced in victory and freedom, while the other half simmered with loss and humiliation. America was like a house rebuilt on fragile ground, and Booth's bullet threatened to shatter it once more. On the afternoon of April 14th, Booth visited Ford's Theater, pretending to pick up his mail. In reality, he was inspecting his battleground. He noticed the single guard assigned to Lincoln's box, relaxed and inattentive. The door was easy to reach. The stage's loudest laugh line was predictable. Booth smiled to himself. It was all too simple. That night, while Lincoln dressed for the play, Booth gathered his pistol and dagger. He whispered to his accomplices, who had their own targets, Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William Seward. The plan was monstrous, a decapitation strike to plunge the Union into chaos. But history would only remember one shot. Back at the White House, as Lincoln prepared to leave, his young son Tad begged him to stay. Tad pleading, "Papa, do you have to go?" "Stay with me tonight." Lincoln, gently, kneeling down. "Just a little while longer, my boy. Mama wishes to go, and the people will be glad to see us. Be good, Tad." It was a simple exchange, tender and human. Yet it was also the last time father and son would ever speak. The carriage rolled away toward Ford's Theater, the gas lamps of Washington flickering in the night. Inside, Lincoln leaned back, unaware that hatred had chosen this very night to strike. The stage was set. Booth was ready, and the laughter of the theater would soon turn to screams. The night of April 14, 1865 began like any other evening in Washington, but the city carried a unique energy. Victory was in the air. Confederate General Robert E. Lee had surrendered just days earlier, signaling the collapse of the Confederacy. The streets buzzed with celebration. Bands played patriotic songs and bonfires lit up the dark corners of the Capitol. For many, it felt like the long nightmare of Civil War was finally ending. Abraham Lincoln, weary from years of struggle, had chosen this evening to seek a brief escape. He and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, were to attend a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. The play was lighthearted, filled with humor, a rare chance for Lincoln to laugh after so many years of sorrow. As the couple entered the theater, the audience erupted into applause. Lincoln, tall and unmistakable, acknowledged them with a gentle nod and a warm smile. Mary Todd clutched his arm, proud yet protective. It was a picture of peace, of a leader finally able to rest. But lurking in the shadows was a man who saw this same moment as the perfect stage for his vengeance. John Wilkes Booth moved with the confidence of a man who belonged. He knew every hallway, every door of the theater. To the stagehands, he was just Booth, the famous actor, someone who had walked these corridors countless times. They suspected nothing, yet in his coat pocket rested a small Derringer pistol, cold and deadly. At his side, a sharpened dagger glimmered faintly in the gaslight. Earlier that evening, Booth had met his fellow conspirators. Lewis Powell had been sent to murder Secretary of State William Seward in his bed. George Atzerodt had been tasked with killing Vice President Andrew Johnson. Their plan was nothing short of treasonous theater, a coordinated strike meant to decapitate the Union government in a single night. But history would soon reveal their failure. Only Booth would carry out his deadly role. Inside Lincoln's private box, the president leaned back in his chair. He was visibly tired, his long frame slouched, yet his face softened as he listened to the actors. At times he chuckled quietly, the sound almost unfamiliar even to his wife. Mary looked at him with relief. Perhaps she thought the darkness was lifting, but the darkness had only taken shape elsewhere. Booth watched from the wings, waiting. He had memorized the script, timing the lines, preparing for the moment of loud laughter that would cover the sound of his shot. To him, the play itself was merely scenery. The true drama was yet to unfold. As the play reached its comedic peak, Booth slipped quietly through the backstage door, climbing the narrow staircase toward the president's box. The guard assigned to protect Lincoln had left his post, either to drink or to watch the play. The path was clear. Each step Booth took was steady, deliberate. His heart did not race. His hands did not tremble. To him, this was destiny. His footsteps were almost silent against the wooden boards, his mind consumed by the conviction that history would remember him as a hero. Inside the box, the Lincoln sat beside Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. They whispered softly, unaware of the predator just a few feet away. The theater roared with laughter at a well-delivered line. Booth slipped inside, the pistol already drawn. He raised it, aimed at the back of Lincoln's head, and pressed the trigger. The crack of the derringer was muffled by the audience's laughter, a sound swallowed by joy that instantly transformed into horror. Lincoln slumped forward, his smile gone forever. Mary screamed, her voice piercing the air, while Major Rathbone leapt to his feet. Booth lunged at him with the dagger, slashing Rathbone's arm before vaulting over the balcony. The audience gasped, frozen in disbelief as Booth landed on the stage. The fall broke a bone in his leg, but adrenaline carried him. He rose, lifted the bloody dagger high, and shouted with theatrical fury, "Booth!" yelling, "Sic semper tyrannis!" Thus always to tyrants. Some swore, he added, "The South is avenged." Before fleeing into the darkness, chaos erupted. Mary Todd clutched her husband, wailing in shock. Clara tried to stem Rathbone's bleeding, while the audience surged in confusion. Was this part of the play, or a nightmare made real? Above the noise, the truth spread like fire. The president had been shot. Doctors rushed forward, but it was too late. The bullet had entered behind Lincoln's left ear, lodging deep within his brain. They carried him out of the theater, through the gaslit streets, to a boarding house across the way. He was barely alive, breathing shallowly, each gasp weaker than the last. Meanwhile, Booth limped into the night, his broken leg slowing him, but his will driving him forward. He mounted a waiting horse and galloped into the countryside, believing he had changed the course of history. To him, this was victory. To the nation, it was an unspeakable tragedy. At Ford's Theater, the laughter of comedy had turned to sobs of grief. Patrons poured into the streets, spreading the news like wildfire. Within hours, Washington was a city in mourning, its joy extinguished in a single shot, and in the small boarding house room where Lincoln lay, the nation's hope fought its last battle against the shadow of hatred. The streets of Washington were no longer alive with celebration. Instead, they pulsed with chaos. The cry had spread like lightning. "The president has been shot." "Lincoln is dying!" Soldiers ran through the avenues, their boots pounding against cobblestone. Citizens spilled from taverns and boarding houses, their faces pale with fear. What had begun as a night of joy was unraveling into the darkest hour the nation had ever known. Inside the Peterson boarding house across from Ford's Theater, the air was heavy with dread. Abraham Lincoln lay stretched across a narrow bed too small for his towering frame. His long legs bent awkwardly, his boots removed. The bullet had shattered the back of his skull, and though his chest still rose and fell with faint breaths, he was slipping away. Doctors surrounded him, their coats stained with blood, their hands trembling as they tried everything, compressing the wound, draining pressure, whispering desperate instructions, but their voices carried no hope. Lincoln's life hung by a thread, and the thread was fraying, Mary Todd Lincoln stood nearby, her face streaked with tears, her cries breaking the silence. She clutched her husband's hand, whispering his name as if her voice alone could call him back. Beside her, Robert Todd Lincoln, their eldest son, held his mother firmly, his young face forced into grim composure. Mary sobbing, "They cannot take him from me, not now, not when peace was at hand." Robert, softly, holding her, "Mother, he is with us still. Hold faith." But Mary saw the truth in the doctor's eyes, and her wails echoed through the small room, piercing every heart. Meanwhile, just beyond the city's edge, John Wilkes Booth rode furiously into the night. His horse's hooves thundered as he clutched the reins with one hand, the other cradling his broken leg. Pain shot through him, but in his mind he was triumphant. He believed he had struck a blow so great it would resurrect the Confederacy, that he would be hailed as a savior of the South. He muttered to himself as he rode, Booth, grimly, "Tyrants must fall. History will honor me." But history, unseen and unbending, was already turning against him. Back in Washington, the cabinet gathered at Lincoln's side. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton arrived, his face stern, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. He took command instantly, his voice sharp and steady. "Stanton, clear the room of chaos. This is now the chamber of the President of the United States." Even in grief, his discipline held. Stanton ordered telegraphs sent, security tightened, every road out of the city patrolled. His mind burned with a single conviction: justice would hunt Booth to the ends of the earth. As hours passed, Lincoln's breathing grew shallower, his pulse fainter. Clergymen entered praying softly, their words rising like incense in the crowded room. Around them the silence was suffocating. Time itself seemed to pause. At dawn, the first light crept through the curtains. The president's breaths rattled weakly, each one sounding like the final gasp of a fading world. Mary leaned close, kissing his hand, whispering broken words of love. At 7:22 a.m., April 15th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln exhaled his last breath. The room froze. Tears blurred every eye. Mary collapsed in despair, her cries filling the house with unbearable grief. It was Stanton who broke the silence. He stood, his voice heavy but resolute. Stanton, solemnly, "Now he belongs to the ages." The words carried like scripture, sealing the moment in eternity. Lincoln was gone. The man who had guided a broken nation through its bloodiest trial, who had carried the weight of freedom on his shoulders, had fallen not on the battlefield but in a theater chair. The victim of hatred. As word spread, the nation convulsed. Church bells tolled in mourning. Flags were lowered to half-mast. Men and women wept openly in the streets. For many, it felt as though the light of hope itself had been extinguished. In the South, reactions were mixed. Some Confederate sympathizers quietly celebrated Booth's deed, seeing it as vengeance. Yet even there, many recoiled in horror, recognizing that the assassination was no act of honor, but a crime against the soul of the nation. Booth, meanwhile, limped deeper into Maryland, hiding in woods and barns, aided by a shrinking circle of conspirators. He scribbled in his diary, justifying his act, convincing himself that the South would rise again. But with each passing day, he became less a hero and more a hunted fugitive. The government unleashed one of the largest manhunts in American history. Posters of Booth's face plastered every wall. Soldiers combed forests, boats, and villages. His name, once applauded in theaters, became synonymous with treachery. In the Peterson house, Lincoln's body was prepared. They placed coins over his eyes, wrapped him in a simple shroud, and began the somber procession. Thousands lined the streets as his casket was carried to the White House. Mothers lifted their children high, whispering, "Remember him. Remember what he stood for." The climax was not only the moment the bullet pierced Lincoln's head, it was the moment the nation realized it had lost more than a leader. It had lost the living embodiment of its hope, and yet even in death Lincoln became larger than life. His words, his vision, his struggle against slavery now glowed brighter than ever, a beacon the assassin could not snuff out. Booth had fired a bullet meant to silence a man, but instead he ignited a legacy. As Stanton stood over Lincoln's still form, he knew the tragedy was not the end. It was the test. Would the Union endure? Would freedom survive? Would the promise of equality take root, or would hatred have the final word? The climax of this story is not only the fall of a president, but the rise of a question that would haunt America forever. Can a nation truly heal after its hope is struck down? The body of Abraham Lincoln was placed inside a mahogany coffin draped with the American flag. His face, pale yet serene, bore the weight of sacrifice. As the funeral train departed Washington, it became more than a journey. It was a pilgrimage. Town after town, city after city, thousands gathered along the tracks. Farmers stood silently in fields, their hats pressed to their chests. Children clutched small flags, their eyes wide with sorrow. Mothers wept openly, whispering prayers. In every stop, his casket was displayed so that ordinary citizens could pay their respects. Lines stretched for miles. Some people walked days just to glimpse the man who had given his life for their freedom. They came not only to mourn, but to promise themselves they would carry his dream forward. Meanwhile, the hunt for John Wilkes Booth reached its grim conclusion. After nearly 2 weeks on the run, Booth was cornered in a barn in Virginia. Surrounded by Union soldiers, he refused to surrender. Flames consumed the barn, and a soldier's bullet struck him down. His final words were bitter, a stark contrast to Lincoln's legacy of compassion. Booth, whispering, dying. Useless. Useless. Booth had sought to become a hero of the South, but instead, he became a symbol of cowardice and hatred. Lincoln, by contrast, rose in death to become a symbol greater than any crown, any general, or any empire. Mary Todd Lincoln, broken by grief, withdrew from the public eye. Robert Todd Lincoln carried the burden of his father's memory, determined to live honorably under its shadow. And Stanton's words, "Now he belongs to the ages," proved prophetic. Lincoln no longer belonged to one family, one party, or even one nation. He belonged to humanity. What hatred tried to destroy, hope transformed into eternal memory. The bullet that ended his life could not silence his words. With malice toward none, with charity for all. Those words became the cornerstone of America's struggle to heal. The assassination was a tragedy, but it also revealed a paradox. While violence can take the life of a man, it cannot kill the power of his ideals. The Union endured. Slavery did not return, and Lincoln's dream, that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish, lived on. The moral of this story is clear. Hatred consumes itself, but hope multiplies. Booth believed that by killing one man, he could destroy a nation's destiny. Instead, he immortalized him. Today, when we remember Abraham Lincoln, we do not remember the theater, the pistol, or the assassin's cry. We remember the tall, humble man who carried a broken nation on his shoulders and dared to believe in freedom for all. His death was not the end. It was the beginning of a legacy too powerful to be erased. Hatred tried to kill hope that April night, but hope proved stronger. Abraham Lincoln's body rests in the earth, but his spirit lives wherever people fight for justice, freedom, and equality. The assassin is forgotten, the president is remembered, and his dream endures.